Psalm 141. Give ear to my voice. A Psalm of David. O Lord, I call upon you. Hasten to me. Give ear to my voice when I call to you. Let my prayer be counted as incense before you, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth, and keep watch over the door of my lips. Do not let my heart incline to any evil, to busy myself with wicked deeds, in company with men who work iniquity, and let me not eat of their delicacies. Let a righteous man strike me. It is a kindness. Let him rebuke me. It is oil for my head. Let my head not refuse it. Yet my prayer is continually against their evil deeds, when their judges are thrown over the cliff. Then they shall hear my words, for they are pleasant. As when one plows and breaks up the earth, so shall our bones be scattered at the mouth of Sheol. But my eyes are towards you, O God, my Lord. In you I seek refuge. Leave me not defenseless. Keep me from the trap that they have laid for me, and from the snares of evildoers. Let the wicked fall into their own nets, while I pass by safely. So here we have, not only in the title, Give Ear to My Voice, but also the first few verses. We have like in many cases, and in many psalms, it is a process of orientation. Now, I can never say it enough, but attention and the way attention is oriented is so fundamental that I think it can be overlooked. And so if we have this orientation of the human mind that appeals to the divine mind, within this appeal is for the divine mind to attend to our appeal. What we are essentially doing is moving into communion. We're moving into a closer relationship. And it's not to say that the divine mind would not be close to us if we did not make this appeal. But I think the human mind is in such a way and under such natural constraints that it's necessary for it to appeal to the divine, to move it closer to the supreme substance, the supreme being. And so when we repeat these things, and we say, Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth, keep watch over the door of my lips, do not let my heart incline to any evil, to busy myself with wicked deeds, in company with men who work iniquity, and let me not eat of their delicacies. What this is referring to is the will of the individual to accept this divine answer or this divine attention. Now, acceptance, I think, comes with a lofty price. We talked at length about heart and of evil in the last podcast. We talked about its corruptible nature. We talked about its guise, the mask that it wears to tempt us. We talked about things that are nominal, things that are in name only. I think about the French Revolution. I think about when all the forms and religious practices became things that were no longer serious. They didn't mean anything to anybody anymore. Of course, that's somewhat of an exaggeration. Of course, there are people within the society that held a tradition and it meant something to them, but by and large the culture underwent this malaise, this dulling of the sensation of the possibility, the capability of the human mind. And evil, I think, is much like this. Just like tyranny is an expression of this evil. It's a very sinister thing. It's a dark thing. It's dark because it hides. It hides where we cannot see it. It often hides within things that we find inherently pleasurable. It hides within things that seem to be so obscure, and the consequences are so downstream that we cannot even see it. And so I think that among the intelligent, the sociopaths, for example, the psychopaths, the very fact that they could see the road farther on more than the average human being, I think gives them an edge up. Because they could see the consequences. And if they can see the consequences while others cannot, they could design a structure, a framework, a foundation. Again, this has to do with the heart. This has to do with evil that lies within it. They could design this to manipulate others. And so what the author is doing here, what David is doing here, is appealing to God and asking him to be able to see and to be able to understand and to recognize when this threatens him. And he says, "Let a righteous man strike me. It is a kindness. Let him rebuke me. It is oil for my head. Let my head not refuse it." So he's saying, let the hard truths be known, because it is right. It will save me in the long run. Yet my prayer is continually against their evil deeds. When their judges are thrown over the cliff, then they shall hear my words, for they are pleasant. So if we have a judge is somebody that is in a position to decide between right and wrong. If we have a judge that is false, that makes false determinations on what is right and what is wrong, when these people are thrown over the cliffs, everything that was downstream of this judge, the people that followed them, the people that were educated by them, the people that were brought before them for judgment, the culture writ large that understands what judgment took place, what the decision was. I think that when this judge goes, the people are now opened to a new way of seeing things. And when David says, "Then they shall hear my words, for they are pleasant," he implies that the words that he speaks are the words of truth, that they are the correct words of judgment. No longer will it be this nominal justice that's held over the heads of the court and its audience, but rather the roof of the courthouse and of the institution is opened to the divine, in the words of David, let's say. Now, this is always a problem. It always will be, probably, and unless we can design an institution in the governmental sense that's completely mechanical, we will always face and run into the problem of place. Where is the judge's place in society? What can he judge and what can he not judge? What is the role of the courthouse? In terms of a leader, what responsibility can a leader have? What authority do they have over another man, for example? And if we leave this authority to God, in the absence of this continual correction that is provided by modern governance, and really any sort of governance that holds a body of people together, in the absence of this type of intervention by the divine, of course this intervention does occur by the divine, but it is not immediately salient or visible to the human mind. And as such, I think we fall into these patterns. We fall into the hands of those that are corrupt. We fall into the hands of those that we are considering here, the judges that are to be thrown over the cliff for making false judgments. We become victim. We become prey to these types. As when one plows and breaks up the earth, so shall our bones be scattered at the mouth of Sheol. And so just as the farmer plows the field, breaks it up so that the seed can enter its substrate, so that it can grow in the future, it can provide our posterity, it can provide our future in general with sustenance, so shall our bones be scattered at the mouth of Sheol. At the mouth of Sheol. Now this is quite I should say it's an intricate metaphor, the mouth of Sheol, because within the body of Sheol we have this dark pit. We have this dark pit that can be experienced by the death of the body, and we can experience it through the death of the mind. Whether it be subjection to slavery or a subjection to some corrosive ideology, religious or otherwise. This is the place of Sheol. And so if our bones are to be scattered at the mouth of it, what does this mean? Because the mouth of something is, in one sense, I think of a place where one consumes. They bring material to themselves to eat, to sustain the body, to sustain the mind. But the mouth is also a place of speech. It's a place of meaning. It's expressive. And so you have this sort of inward and outward representation. The going in and the going out. And what can we say of our bones? Our bones are structural. They provide support to the body. They provide structure to the body so that we can move, so that we can participate in the world. Now, what is the body in this sort of symbolic sense? The body is the thing that holds, I think, fundamentally. If we were to think about this human-centric view, the body is the thing that holds the soul, it holds the heart, it holds the mind. Now, if we stick with the body is the thing that holds the mind being the thing that can appreciate, communicate with, discover the divine, it can enhance its material condition, it can enhance its capacity for any virtue. But I think fundamentally, when we think of mind, we should stick to the relationship that is possible with the source of being, with the source of mind itself. Because otherwise we can get lost in these sort of positive and negatives. What of the addict that destroys the mind? What of the virtuous, striving individual? sure, we can attribute a right or wrong to these experiences, but in general, the mind is something that has the ability to do something greater. It has the capacity to hold divine information. It can appreciate and interpret divine law. Okay, very good. So now back to the bone situation. So what we've discussed is that the bones provide the structure for the thing that holds the mind. The bones provide the structure for the body or the temple that allows the divine to enter into our consciousness. The bones are the supports for which the divine can enter into our reality. And so if we place this at the mouth of Sheol, if we scatter them at the mouth of Sheol, we scatter them at the place of going in and going out, not only will we meet death, not only will our bones meet death, the physical death as it enters into Sheol, and I think in this interpretation, if our bones are to meet death in this sense, and following the analogy previous, or the metaphor previous, about the plow, what its purpose is, to disrupt the earth so that we can prepare it for planting the seed that is for our future, for our posterity, for our future selves. And the scattering of the bones is in the same manner. And so this has to be a fundamentally positive experience. So if one is to move towards Sheol, there are different ways that one can move towards Sheol, but let's take one at a time. Let's begin with the physical example, the physical death of the body, the physical death of the mind. As it moves into and approaches the mouth of Sheol, the pit of darkness, and it encounters these scattered bones that are the supports to the body, which thereby, at its head, has the capacity for divine insight. I think this is a net positive for anybody that exits this reality, because all of a sudden they encounter the tradition, they encounter the love, they encounter the purpose, the true purpose of the mind. And I wouldn't wish anything less than for an individual that is dying to inhabit the type of mind that is in harmony with the divine mind, because this is inherently one of love and one of peace. Okay, so we've now talked about the entering into Sheol, the sort of catcher's mitt of the bones of this structure. Now, not only does it apply to the individual in this case, it can scale, but I think of also the family that is involved in this experience, because it is an experience when somebody dies. And if the family is involved in this, and if the family travels up right to the mouth of Sheol with their loved ones, and they participate in this experience, everybody will be enriched because of it. They will learn a lot. And I think this is one of the potential experiences, just like raising a family and childbirth. This is one of the experiences that we accept certain responsibilities, and we open our minds to certain possibilities, to certain ways of seeing the divine insight, a certain way of understanding closure. of accepting things that were left unsaid, perhaps in the person's life, that need to be resolved. Perhaps a way of coming closer to an individual. Perhaps a family member that we had not necessarily lost touch with, but did not appreciate in life. Because we become busy with work and chasing money and all of the superficial things of the modern day, perhaps of the day in general. That all of a sudden this experience is something that opens us. It's something that makes us appreciate life, appreciate one another. Okay, one example. The going into Sheol in the physical sense, the physical death. And so that's a net positive experience. Now what of the individual? Let's say the most obvious would be the troubled man, the addict. The individual that has had some trauma in their life that they cannot reconcile, they cannot solve. Any individual, under any circumstance, that finds themselves in a state of mind of delusion, of potential darkness, of depression, of subjection to something that is inferior to the divine or what is highest. It'll encounter these bones at the mouth of Sheol. And again, another experience. It encounters this structure, this temple of mind that exists within our culture, ideally, that will intercept these people before they enter into the mouth. And just as they are at the mouth, before they're about to give it all away, in a sense, they're intercepted. And I think at this point, when we are most vulnerable, perhaps we are on the verge of suicide, perhaps we are on the verge of a massive alcohol addiction or something like this, food addiction, whatever it is, they are greeted by people who care. They are greeted by the bones that were scattered, the safety net of mind, the safety net, yes, the safety net of mind. And again, just like as in death, we can capture these people and have such a profound experience that not only does it change the behavior of the people that we're about to enter into this dull and damp, dark pit, but it will change everyone around them. Because this transformation is powerful. It is a very powerful thing. Okay, so that's another sense of going in. It's the going in of the living individual into the darkness. So we covered the two types of going in. The one I just mentioned and the physical death. And what of the coming out? Of course, the physical will not come out of this realm unless we are talking about a divine intervention. But rather, what's most salient to our, and what is most highly probable in our own experience, will be those that enter Sheol through the context of the living. And through whatever experience that they've had, they exit Sheol. And again, they meet this net. But it's not an obstructive net that attempts to pull them back into the depths. But rather, it's a net of catching, as a mitt catches a baseball. It is an embrace. And as these people enter this temple that exists at the mouth of Sheol, I think their transformational experience is validated. Others learn from it. The individuals that have succeeded in this are, just as one perhaps is a victim of, we've had a massive earthquake recently in Turkey. Many thousands of people have died. You know, I can imagine, as a part of this example, one of these individuals that was in one of these buildings that collapsed. Perhaps they were traumatized from it, and the point at which they come out of this place is almost like coming out of Sheol, coming out of the rubble. And I can imagine their expression, their sort of this traumatic expression, this experience that hasn't completely changed their life. And now they're caught by the saviors. You know, the people that are helping to find the missing people, to repair the damage. And in this way they are received. And again, it's another experience. It's another human experience. And if it is done rightly, if it is held well, I think it has the potential to lift everybody up with it. These are the experiences of man that move us closer to the divine. Again, the example that I used earlier. One of the fundamental experiences of man is taking the responsibility of family and having children, because it does similar sorts of things. It's part of this experience that opens the mind. Of course, not always does it do this. Things can go wrong. People can misstep. But this is human nature. And so this is a tough verse, verse 7. There's a lot there. You know, I'm aware of another interpretation of this verse. I think it's less satisfying, where the interpretation of breaking up the earth by the plow is more of a symbol of violence and destruction. Now this would probably be more akin to what David would write about in his time, and given his situation. But I think there's a bit of gold that was buried beneath the surface when he dug up this thought of his, and perhaps maybe he didn't even see it himself. I think it was maybe a divine planting of the potential interpretation here. I think it is equally likely that, as I've just began to discuss there, that this act of plowing, it's this violence and destruction, as if the enemies are treating David as an object to be sort of discarded and destroyed. And the scattering of bones is more of this sense of vulnerability, this helplessness and despair. And so it's a statement and an ask of deliverance, which is it's possible, but it really doesn't make sense, because the bones are before the mouth of Sheol. You know, if you're going to ask for deliverance, you should be delivered from inside of the mouth of Sheol. You know, that really doesn't make sense. And if you're going to say plow and break up the earth, why even put plow in there? Because the whole point of plowing is to prepare the soil for the future planting of the seed, which is inherently something that is projecting into the future. And of course, it involves the destruction of the earth, but the earth is ours. It is ours to imbue with intelligibility and meaning. So I think the latter interpretation that I've given here is not sufficient to what it seems to be implying, even if the author felt it be more of the latter. And it does sound sort of consistent with David's language. But then again, I mean, he never ceases to surprise, I suppose. And I should also say that we just got off of verse 6, talking about the judges being overthrown, false judges being overthrown. And when they hear my words, they are pleasant, because now the mind is liberated from the false judge. And so to follow that with something that is sort of uplifting and positive, I think is appropriate. And so the former interpretation, I think, holds a lot of weight here as well. But my eyes are towards you, O God, my Lord. In you I seek refuge. Leave me not defenseless. Keep me from my trap. Keep me from the trap that they have laid for me. and from the snares of evildoers. Let the wicked fall into their own nets while I pass by safely. And then again back into this ask for deliverance, this recognition of the power that evil has because of our own blindness. Psalm 142, You are my refuge. A maskil of David when he was in the cave, a prayer. With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see. There is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. So there are more than a few, Psalms of David that can sometimes be kind of difficult to sift through. Because David is often asking for help of the Lord. He's having a hard time. He's down on his luck, let's say. He's confronted by enemies, and it's often this sort of repetition. On the other hand, there are certain psalms by David that are completely mind-bending and eye-opening. But regardless of the psalm, or the particular type of psalm of David, both are useful. Both are useful to come back to and reflect on. Now, I'm not saying one thing or another about the psalm here. It's just an introductory thought. And what I would like to do with this one, with the Psalm of David, is to try and inhabit his experience, because the title gives it away from the outset. You are my refuge. And it says, a maskil of David when he was in the cave, a prayer. Now, David was in a cave on two separate occasions in the Bible. One when he was running from Saul because he was just appointed king over Israel. Now, David was Saul's servant before he became king. Saul was king before David. And so Saul wished to destroy him. And on another occasion, David and his men were again hiding from Saul in the wilderness, and they took refuge in the cave. And so regardless of the circumstance here, David fled to these caves to take refuge. And I imagine in my mind that within this state of mind, within the context of the situation, that is, he is fleeing from an oppressive force, a force that wishes to end his life. He's in this cave and he's trying to figure out what to do. He has to appeal to something higher. He has to contemplate. He has to brainstorm. And these psalms are the result of this brainstorm. Perhaps we can say that they are a bit more than that. Due to the experience, due to the conditions, it allowed for the type of opening to take place that allows this sort of divine wisdom to take hold or to set foot in. And if only human beings had the capacity to do this all the time, at every waking moment, we would be certainly much elevated creatures, but that is neither here nor there. And so just like we were talking about in the previous psalm, about this structure at the mouth of Sheol being sort of a temple of experience that we can that we utilize for our own ends, in a sense, but not in the selfish way. We use it for our own ends, so that we may lift ourselves up, so that we may perfect our tradition, continue our heritage, expand our minds, come into connection with others, expand our ideas of love. And so when I think of the title, You Are My Refuge, and again I think about the experience of David. I think about this experience, this very experience, this mind-expanding experience. It's a transformative type of an experience. With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. And so here we have the very beginning. And we have to imagine that every line here is completely genuine. Remember, this is a man whose life is threatened. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. I think that's an interesting statement. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. We've talked about this in a previous episode of the podcast. What is the difference between spirit, mind, soul, and heart? What ways are they similar? I believe I discussed spirit. I discussed heart. And the example for spirit that I used was when somebody is burning leaves in the fall, and we can smell the smoke of the fire, but we cannot see the fire. We know the fire to exist because of something that we observe. But yet, what we observe is only a part of the totality of the fire, the totality of the experience that is the fire. Now, if we were standing right next to it, of course, we could see its flame, we could feel its heat, we could see its structure, we could see what it is burning, we could smell it. And so, it's an interesting thing to consider this metaphor and lay it on top of the way that it is being used here in this psalm. Because now, instead of the spirit, in terms of the fire, being something that is the object, or something that is other than the self, here now we have it referred to as the spirit of the individual. And so how can we take this analogy of the fire and place it within the individual? How can the spirit of an individual be something that is partial to the totality of its being? And I'm not so sure that this is a difficult question to answer. I think about this nearly every day. It didn't strike me until now. I go about my day every day. I have particular feelings. I don't feel the same when I immediately wake up in the morning as I do before I lay my head to rest at night. Nor do I feel the same in the middle of the day, in the middle of the workday. Nor do I feel the same just before I'm about to begin my work. There's this sort of ramping up process and ramping down process. Now, there's not always a culmination at some peak. Often there are highs and lows throughout a day. But I would say that for any given point, with the exception perhaps of the tradition, the practice that I engage in, like talking into this microphone, that the purpose of which is to connect me to something that is greater. Now in work, I think that there are certain instances that allow for this sort of thing to happen, but they're few and far between, unfortunately. And so when I think about my being throughout the day, I can't really identify a particular moment, taking today for an example, that I can point to that says, this is me, this is the totality of me, this experience and this interaction, this exchange. Now there are things that come close to it. There are ways that I express myself that feel very genuine, that feel very true to me, that I'm satisfied with, that I've put forth to other people, that they can see, that they can experience, whether they like it or not. And although this thing that I put forth feels like it is the truth of me, the totality of me, it is but a spirit. It is but an odor from the flame of what burns. And of course what burns, perhaps we can call it the soul. Perhaps it's an integration of the soul and mind and heart, all of these sorts of things. Who knows exactly where the center of this being is? But the spirit is the truth of this interaction that is given to the sort of objective world, that is given to other minds for them to perceive and to experience. Now the person or the people that come closest to the center, to standing next to the fire, are those that I would say that love me, whether it be a romantic partner or a close friend or somebody in my family. They understand my nature more so than people that I work with. The spirit, in their sense, is much stronger. They are much closer to this fire. And when David says, when my spirit faints within me, I think this is a rather unfortunate thing, but something that I know all too well. It's sort of it can be a state of confusion. It's almost a loss of faith. Because it's as though, as the observer part of the self is seeing that what fulfills it, the truth of its being, is no longer satisfying the part of itself that is viewing it. And I think this can create friction, no doubt. It can create disturbance, anxiety, perhaps depression. And so the question is, in my case, as it is in David's, what do we do about it? Of course, the line after this is the answer to it. When my spirit faints within me, you, referencing God, know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Now his confusion and disruption of spirit comes from another. If I were to reflect on my own case, I think a lot of it comes from the inside. It could be a corruptible influence from the outside that corrupts my inside, and then it sort of revolves back into the outside again. A sort of demonic temptation, perhaps. Look to the right and see. There is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. And I think this goes back to the analogy that we put forth about the spirit. If no one is to take notice, no refuge to remain within the individual, no one cares for the soul, it is because the flame that burns, that gives off this spirit, the spirit that comes off of the centrality of being, of what is. Either the being itself is distinguished or becoming less vibrant, and therefore the spirit that it emits is also less vibrant, and the spirit that it emits is something that other human beings can pick up on. And so in the case of David, I think perhaps doubt is the thing that does this for him. It's the not knowing where to turn because of the enemies that surround him. It creates this doubt. It creates this insecurity. And I think this insecurity and this anxiety, it covers the being. It covers the fundamental part of the self that gives out the spirit. And so it's much more difficult for people to care when they cannot sense this spirit. Now that's one interpretation. That's not the only thing that could lead to no one caring for the soul of David. It could be purely because of perception, the blindness of man, not understanding his way, not understanding the path that he walks, and as a result, by pure perception, by pure orientation, not being able to pick up on the sense, almost as if you hear about these things often, of some chemical that burns that gives off no odor, but it's deadly to the human being if we inhale it. We don't have the ability to perceive it, but it doesn't mean it's meaningless. But in the case of David here, no one cares for his soul. It could be something like this. And that's not to say that his spirit is a poison. In fact, it would probably be the opposite. His spirit is something that is rich and enlivening, full of purpose. But perhaps due to the time, or due to the mental framework of the people that surround him in his culture and his society, maybe they just don't understand it. They don't see it. And that might not be the people at large. It's just the ones that wish to dispose of him, that being Saul and Saul's allies. But it seems as though the resulting effect here is profound on David. I'm sure he feels a certain way for Saul. He has a certain love for Saul. And I think it's probably this tension. On one hand, he knows what the path that he must walk. On the other hand, there's this sort of blanket that's put over the flame to prevent the spirit from permeating the world. And I think it's because of a conflict. It's possible that it's a conflict of wanting to love somebody that wishes to do them harm. Now, this is pure speculation, but I think it would be reasonable to suggest this. And it fits perfectly in line with what we've been discussing thus far in terms of the metaphor of spirit and the perception of David's soul by others. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. So now, of course, this refuge, this place of hiding, this place that one goes for security in a time of disruption, potential danger. It makes perfect sense that one would place refuge within the Lord, because what they are doing, when David says, I say, you are my refuge, he's saying that the will that he has within his mind, his conscious mind, the thing that can direct. He is placing that within the being of all being, the source of it all. He's placing it within love. He's placing it within the broader context. Our sort of general statement for this whole thing, for the creator of it all, for the source of all being, is God. So he places his self inside of that for refuge. And then he says, my portion in the land of the living. Now what does this mean? A portion, of course, is a piece of a whole. Now I think what he's referencing here is his portion is what his mind is capable of. Moreover from that, it's what his mind is, the portion that his mind is capable of within the divine. It might not be correct to say this, within the divine body. It doesn't sound quite right. Because if he was within the divine body, it's likely that it would be after his physical life that he experiences that. And I wouldn't even say that it would be he anymore. Or experience. I don't even know what that would mean. I'm not sure what the I is in that context. But rather I would say that his portion, if it is directed towards the union, towards the unity, it means this small little pea brain, in relation to the scope and the scale of the divine mind, that is his portion. That is his mechanism by which he can appreciate, by which he can take refuge in God. And the psalm finishes with verse 7, bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. A very interesting way to tie off this knot. Beginning this ending by saying, bring me out of prison. Bring me out of a place of confinement. And it's beautiful how this psalm flows, and it fits perfectly with reason. Because we've just finished discussing the effect that this experience has had on David's spirit, on his soul, on his being. And we talked about the way in which the spirit can flow from the being of the individual. And based on certain contextual factors, based on certain experiences, based on certain life events, perhaps based on the time of day. But again, the time of day is not just the time that is meaningful, it is what's happening at that time. I mentioned just waking up, just falling asleep. I mentioned the middle of the day. I remember just beginning the workday, the ramping up and the ramping down. These are all different sort of levels in which the being flows from us, in which the spirit flows from us. And we all understand the times that we just don't feel quite right. We feel perhaps a bit distressed, anxious, not grounded. Our feet feel like they are. We feel like we are floating and that there's nothing beneath our feet, nothing to hold us. And I think this is, in a sense, this is the prison that David talks about. Of course, for him it's a bit acute, because there are people that are after him to kill him. And now he's seeking refuge in a cave. He has no food. Presumably he has no water. He has a couple men around him that have gathered around him that support his cause. But the entire king of the nation of God's people wishes to kill him. And so this would certainly put a damper on my spirit. This would certainly put a damper on my being. I would be questioning myself every step of the way. I'd be appealing to God every step of the way. And so this has put him in a bit of a bind, in a bit of a prison. How to ignite the flame of the soul of the individual in such a way to break out of this prison is a difficult question. But I think he does it in the right way. He asks for him to be brought out of this prison so that he may give thanks to God. Because to say thank you to God is to accept and to understand what you've been given. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. A beautiful way to end it. It's a beautiful poem. And I think we will end this episode there. We'll continue next time with a title that we have seen before, My Soul Thirsts for You. This is Psalm 143, a Psalm of David.